So there's been a report of an organization that got hit by ransomware. Took them down for 2 weeks. They came back up, big announcement. Hey, great news, we're back online. Within 24 hours, they were back offline because they got hit with the exact same ransomware by the exact same threat actor group. So they just didn't do the right level of due diligence on understanding what the kill chain was, what the indicators of compromise were, and removing persistence, like truly expelling the threat actor out of the environment before going to a full recovered state.
If you're making technology decisions that impact people, budgets, and outcomes, you're in the right place. Welcome to Insight On, the podcast for leaders who need technology to deliver real results. No fluff, no filler, just the insight you need before your next big decision. Hi, I'm your host, Jillian Viner. In our last episode, we sat down with Insight's Chief Information Security Officer, Jeremy Nelson, and he left us in a precarious moment, right in the clutches of a security breach. Today, we're going to walk through what happens after the incident takes place, and hopefully Jeremy can take us through completely unscathed. Let's go. Well, Jeremy, I'm really glad to have you back because you left me in
the cliffhanger, right?
A dire situation.
Yeah. I mean, you've now been breached.
Yes.
I imagine you want to get out of that.
I do. So just a refresher, and for those that maybe missed the last episode, first of all, you should definitely go back to it because that was really...
It was a lot of fun to record.
It was a lot of fun, but also terrifying and really, really informative. So today is really our part two to that conversation. Yep. The breach has happened. Someone has infiltrated the company. So you're going to help me get out of this horrible situation. And I won't make you be the bad guy anymore.
I love it. Thank you so much.
I know
that
that's
was
really
very
uncomfortable role for you.
Yes, I am glad to be back on the good guy side of this equation.
And ironically, you're in black today.
I know.
So...
We switched up the uniform a little bit so it doesn't exactly align, but...
All right. So again, we really left it at the moment when I realized that, oh my gosh, I've been hit. Mm-hmm. Something has happened.
Yep.
That's a very critical moment. So first of all, let's start with the itty bitty baby step. As a user, and I see something that I shouldn't see that indicates that I've been attacked, what do I do in that moment? What's the best thing to do, and what's the worst thing that I could do?
Yeah, so the best thing that you could do is you really want to make sure that it's coordinated. So if you're a user and you feel like you have been the victim of some type of an attack and you are patient zero, if you will, the number one thing you want to do is you want to reach out to your IT and your InfoSec team, identify them, let them or notify them that, hey, something has happened. This doesn't look right. And give them that opportunity to do an investigation to understand exactly what's happening and then to be able to incorporate that into their predefined response procedures. That's the best thing that you can do. The worst thing that you can do is to just ignore it, to be like, it was just a system glitch, or I'll deal with this some other time, or, thinking that it's just going to go away. Mm-hmm. And we have seen that is where a lot of times these things will happen in the background, even though you've kind of got this suspicion like something wasn't quite right, mm-hmm. Or my computer's not behaving normally anymore after whatever, this particular website that I visited. And so you just kind of put it in the background. You're like, I'll just deal with it. And you just kind of go about your day. And one of the biggest risks that we have, it's allowing persistence. And so allowing this threat actor to remain in the environment undetected, and to continue to scan. And really what they do is once they get into patient number one, victim number one, is they move laterally. They just start to scan. They look for other things, other targets within the environment. They look for other ways that they can spread. And the deeper that they can get, the more pervasive that they can get embedded into your environment, the harder it is to expel them. And so never just let it sit. Even if it's just suspicious, mm-hmm. Nobody in InfoSec, nobody in IT is going to chastise you for reaching out and being like, hey, I think something bad is happening. I think I may have been the victim of some type of a cybersecurity attack or a cybersecurity event, and I think I should be looked at. No one is going to be like, oh, boy who cried wolf, right? Like, no, they're going to take it seriously. They're going to investigate, and it gives them the greatest opportunity to identify, contain the risk early on, and help manage the overall exposure to the entire environment.
No, I think I'm like that panic person that wants to reach for the plug. Like if I suspect something's going on.
That's not terrible, by the way.
I was going to ask, does that even make a difference if I shut down
totally
my computer?
Does. Shut it down, like turn it off, get it disconnected from the network. All those things are great. There's a good chance that your IT team will either want to boot it up to be able to look at some things, or they might just have you ship it in to them so they can put it in kind of like a clean room environment in an isolated space and be able to investigate it. Yep.
Now you say it's going to go in there and kind of see what else it can connect to. So that means if I'm connected to a VPN, if I'm connected to my email, like what are the vulnerabilities in that moment that it's trying to seek out?
So it can go a couple of different ways. So the first one is it's going to look at what it has access to just locally stored on your computer, right? Like, are there valuable assets that sit there? It'll also try and harvest credential data. So there's a certain amount of credential data.
So that document that I've saved my usernames and passwords.
Goodness, please no. But yes, like it will look for those types of things. Like there are different pattern matchings that will go out and look for various different sensitive information that can sit on your hard drive. But even just by nature of the systems that we use, right? Like you take your laptop and is it always plugged into the corporate network?
Maybe. No.
It probably isn't, right? Like there's lots of times where you want to use your computer and you're completely disconnected altogether. Mm-hmm. It could be someplace where connectivity is not available, like maybe you're on an airplane and the Wi-Fi is not working, but you still want to be able to get some things done. So there are things that exist locally on the laptop that allow that to function. Some of those are cached versions of your credentials. And so there are tools that'll actually go into that and be able to harvest those cached credentials and be able to use those as a way to crack them and to give them further access into other parts of the environment, right? That can be used either directly on your laptop or remotely to get access to other systems that use those same credentials. So obviously harvesting the valuable resources and assets that exist on the existing laptop. The other piece is that immediately they'll usually start scanning, like what do I have access to? So it's connected to a network. Most of our devices these days are connected almost all the time, right? So they're obviously, even when I asked you that question, you had to think about it. Maybe yes, maybe no. For the most part, yes. For the most part, our systems are connected to a network. And so what they want to do is they want to see what else is connected to that network. If I was able to exploit this particular attack and get access to this asset, are there other, chances are this is a standardized set, mm-hmm. right, tool set that you're using as an employee. I'm going to go out and scan and see if there's any others out there. And if there are, chances are I can use the exact same attack to get access to them that I used to get access to you.
Got it. All right. So now a user, I've contacted IT. IT is on the case.
Yep.
Who's the first call?
So the first call, so I guess we'll walk it this way. So there's usually differing degrees of, we'll call them cyber incidents, if you will, right? So some of those are very isolated, right? So we catch it early. It's relatively, I'm not going to say it's low risk, but it's low impact at the moment. So we have an ability to be able to isolate, identify, and contain it on that particular asset. Maybe it is just as much as like, hey, let's just power that down. We don't see that it's spread, right? Let's bring it in. We're going to look at the indicators of compromise associated with this particular attack, and then go out and see if it's existing anywhere else in the environment, see if they move laterally. So that's usually the first thing that they're going to do, is they're going to try and isolate and contain on the device that's been identified, but also look for any other activity, presence of activity across the entire IT environment. So you use a variety of different tools for that, threat hunting tools, SIMs or MDRs, all that kind of stuff, to go out and look for other activities that might be embedded in your environment. So look to see, is this isolated or is this much broader? Then you start to get into like the middle tier, if you will, where it does look like some level of spread has happened, or they were able to exfiltrate some amount of data off of that particular asset. Then you start to identify like what's the overall risk of the credentials, or the data that's been basically shipped outside of the controls of your environment, and then how do you actively respond to that? Then you get to the big one. And this is the one that people like, that's really makes the headlines because they're so big, they're so impactful. And you're talking about like something that gets to the scale of like ransomware, where it literally takes down the entirety of your IT infrastructure. And so the way that you would respond kind of depends on where it falls within those three different tiers. So usually at your IT SOC level can handle tier 1. Tier 2, you're usually bringing in some leadership because there has to be an examination of sensitivity of data that's been leaked outside. What's the overall spread? Really kind of extending your search a little bit further to see how far this particular threat actor was able to get into your IT environment. But still, the overall intent is to isolate, contain, and remove them because IT operations are continuing. You're continuing able to operate your business. The third one is full on 5-alarm type of a situation.
The worst nightmare.
The worst nightmare. Your business is literally offline. And so it's a much more severe type of a response. And so usually those calls, you're bringing in the executive committee and usually your legal team. So that's typically where those types of conversations start. Now, I would imagine for the purposes of our exercise, right, the two smaller ones that can be typically handled by InfoSec and your SOC team, those are pretty run of the mill. I think what we're probably going to be focusing on a little bit more is that top tier, the 5-alarm, the major incident. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
How many companies know who to call in that moment?
So that's where the incident response or crisis response plan comes in. I think I shared this, I've done a number of different recordings with Jillian, and I always lean in really, really heavily into having that plan. So it always comes back to I love me my sports, and when you're coming in and you're playing a game, like you want to have a plan. You never want to just kind of come in and wing it, right? The more orchestrated that you're going to be, the more effective you're going to be able to carry out your plan and achieve your objective. And so it's no different when it comes to incident response. You always want to start off before the crisis to actually understand and build out a coordinated plan on how you're going to respond to these types of events. So I think that's step number 1 is making sure you have a plan. Step number 2, making sure you're practicing that in peacetime, right? You don't want to, the first time you exercise your plan is when you're in the middle of a crisis because people are distracted. There's a lot of noise. It's really difficult. And so if it's not a part of your muscle memory on how to execute that response, you're just as bad as almost not even having a plan.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this numerous times over the years. And I think you've told me before that you've been doing incident response for years. You've been in the security space forever. You've been part of those teams. And I think you're always surprised at the number of companies who maybe they have a plan, but it's collecting dust in a drawer.
Yep. It's easy human nature, right? Because we've got a lot on our plates. And just like every organization, we're not getting more resources, right? We're constantly being asked to do more with less. And so annually or semi-annually, whatever your review plan or your review process looks like or schedule, you come through and you're like, do we have an incident response plan? Yeah, remember we developed that. You check the box. It becomes a check the box exercise as opposed to an integrated part of your business operations, which is really what an incident response is. Mm-hmm. And I'll even throw it out there that I even said this a little bit earlier, is that it's not even just incident response through a cybersecurity lens, it's crisis response. And that could be through a number of different avenues where your communications or your operations is disrupted by a variety of different external factors, whether that's a cybersecurity event, whether that is natural disaster, whether that's, I'll even throw, looking back at 9/11. Like that was really a huge test on crisis response. It was an act of terror that actually happened against a variety of different organizations that completely shut down operations. In fact, we saw a lot of disaster recovery solutions really spin up as a result of 9/11 because a lot of people just really didn't even foresee anything like that ever happening. So, so it really does come back down to crisis response and building out what that plan looks like. And it's just good practice for business resumption, business operation, and continuity.
That's a good reminder, though, that it's not just a security incident that's going to trigger some of these actions. It could be anything. And I feel like that's particularly important right now because we talk about the power grid, and how sensitive the power grid is. We've got, storms and monsoon season here in Arizona and all of these things that absolutely could cause issues. So you mentioned getting legal involved, but it sounds like you kind of need sort of your standing operator procedures, and maybe there's a different way that you phrase this for security teams, but like who's on the first call list, who's on your second wave, And how do you make sure the right people have the right communications at the right time? And that includes the public, right? Because
Yes.
you can only withhold this
PR is
information
a
from
part
the
of that.
public for so long.
Correct. Well, and especially with the new SEC regulations, as far as like, the degree of impact on your organization and having to you have an obligation to be able to file a K-8 that actually basically attests to a cybersecurity event or major incident happening within your environment and the overall risk and impact to data and digital assets and your operations. So there's a lot. And every year it gets more and more stringent as far as like what those communications look like. So you're spot on. So there's various different degrees where it starts, and then how do you bring more and more people into the understanding and visibility that something is happening? But I think it's also important to recognize that there's a certain level of compartmentalization that does have to happen. Not everybody gets all the information.
Why is that? What's the importance of that?
So there's sensitivity as far as like the information that's being leaked. But I think one other thing to kind of consider is that when you get into these high pressure, highly complex types of response activities, is that the role of leadership really shifts and can almost be a distraction, because you'll end up having various different work streams that are happening. And the leadership team obviously has the greatest level of overall influence and responsibility to the business. But at the same time, they have an undue sway over the direction that technical people will be taking. And so when I talk about compartmentalization, is that one of the things that we highly encourage is separation between technical work streams and executive communications and directives. And so making sure that they're not combined together, because some of the most damaging behaviors that I've seen is where you have a CEO sitting on a tech bridge that's trying to give direction on how the technical team should be responding or where their priorities should be in certain areas, especially without necessarily knowing all the downstream impacts and technical considerations that have to go into these recovery efforts. And what ends up happening is you end up, because most employees won't say no to a CEO.
Right.
So a CEO says, go do this right now. They'll drop whatever they're working on. They'll go and address that, but they won't realize the chain of events that just got set into motion and other things that are now going to be delayed. And so one of the things that we really stress is creating a separate tech bridge and a separate executive bridge, but then really focusing heavily on a communication gap, or basically a bridge that allows those two to stay in sync with each other, so that the executives are always fully aware of the progress that's being made by the technical teams, and any decisions or activities that are happening within the executive space are getting appropriately communicated down to the tech team. So it's really, really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're right. People aren't going to say no to the CEO.
Nope.
So
Let's
talk about that bridge. When you get on that phone call, and this is, I think, a scary part that you've alluded to in a previous episode, what is the reality of that security call today that wasn't true, let's say, 2 years ago?
When we say the reality,
because of AI.
Oh, because of AI. Okay. So yeah. So there's a lot of things that AI has introduced that really amplifies some of these first responses. So I think one of the things that we're really starting to see is, we talked about this a little bit on our previous conversation, is deepfakes, right? So deepfakes are a great way of not only getting your toe into an environment, but also how do you remain persistent? So typically what happens is that you assume, right? So this threat actor gets in, and they get in through exploiting either one asset or one person, but the whole point is that they get credentials. Those credentials are usually uniform across all the various different systems that are integrated across your IT environment, and that includes your collaboration space. And so one of the default behaviors is everyone just falls back to using email communications. They fall back to using the various different IM and video conferencing tools that they typically use. Well, guess what? Those credentials have been now compromised. And so that threat actor has the ability to potentially perpetrate as the person that they compromised. And it gives them access to be able to view into the various different response activities that are going on and being orchestrated by both the leadership team, the incident commander, your response team. And so there's a certain level of care that needs to be taken to make sure that the people that are participating in the response are just the good people,
So
are
you've
just the people in
literally
your organization.
been in the midst of an incident recovery and realize that someone who you thought was on your team is actually, they're like, there's a rat in the room.
Yep. So that has actively happened, and we recognized that something was off.
What was that
with the
moment? Like,
participants.
can you tell me what went down?
Yeah. So everyone jumps on, and we're sitting there. We're having a deep. We're really in the thralls of the whole situation, and we look over and we just look at the attendee list. And we're like, man, this doesn't feel quite right. Right? Like something just seemed off. Like some people were dialing with phone numbers, some people were coming in with normal IDs, and so immediately, it was just a gut reaction and instinct. Hey, everyone, go camera on. And as soon as the mandate went out that no matter who you were or where you were at, you had to go camera on, all of a sudden you start seeing participants dropping off. And instantly we knew that the communication channels coordinating our incident response were already being the threat actors were already participating in them. They were already being compromised, and they were actively listening to all the counter measures that we were putting into place to combat against them. And they were able to stay one step ahead of our response and recovery efforts because they were actively listening in on those activities. So that's another thing that, when we talk about like recommendations, we often talk about what's your out of band communication plan? What's the tool? What's your method for connecting with the right people and ensuring that you're only connecting with the right people? Because lots of times, whether it's because of availability, because they go through and they execute an attack that takes your email and your instant messaging and your normal paths of communication down, or you can no longer trust them.
Yeah.
You need to have some type of out-of-band way of bringing the core team together to effectively manage communication.
Even if you do that, I mean, we talked about earlier about deepfakes. Like deepfakes is how they potentially get in or they get wire transfers. So how do you even know if if you go cameras on, how do you know you're not looking at deepfakes?
So that's absolutely a risk. So, and that really comes back to a big kind of talking point that I've had, or as far as like, how do we battle deepfake, right?
Yeah.
And deepfake really comes back to really focusing in on what's your true identity. It's an identity verification problem that we're trying to deal with. And so what we start to see is typically it's just a username, password, and maybe MFA. And we check the box and we're like, okay, this person is who they are, who they say they are, based off of these factors that we've been able to use to validate their identity.
Multi-factor authentication,
username, password, all that kind of stuff, right? But more and more, we're starting to see where, credentials are getting leaked and compromised. Even MFA tokens are being transferred over to different devices. So that's not necessarily a complete protection. And so really the whole concept starts to shift into how do we do true verified ID? Like real-time video, like facial recognition at point of time of event, right? So you can't just log in, like you'll actually require extended verification that includes like real-time facial recognition or some other type of out-of-band security, like a identity wallet or something of that nature that is outside of the normal authentication flow that allows you to truly identify and validate the identity of the person on the other end.
Terrifying. So even when you think you're safe with the people that you trust to get you out of a situation, you still have to be on guard.
Yep.
And work through different identity verifications, maybe some different security bridges to make sure that you're actually speaking in confidence.
So here's a great example. So going back to that similar situation where we were talking about the threat actors actually joining into the incident response bridge. This is a particular organization where the primary point of attack was their identity store. And so what we literally had to do is help them rebuild it from scratch. And the way that we did that is you called a phone number on file. We started with the CEO and we got them to validate themselves. We created their account in a whole new directory environment, sent them the new password, made them, we sat there on the phone with them, waited for them to change their password. And then once we had them validated, it was then, okay, who are your direct reports? and what's their contact information that you have. And we literally had to build this out like a tree, like a call tree, starting at the very top of the pyramid and working our way down through and recreating only people that we could directly identify and verify who they were in person.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's the nightmare within the nightmare, is realizing that your incident response is already infiltrated.
Yep.
And you have to have a switch plan so that you can actually safely and securely come up with a plan. What should IT teams not do in that recovery model? And I'm thinking about things, and tell me if I'm wrong, but like, how do they make sure that they're not, so quote unquote, like compromising the crime scene, or maybe, I mean, you mentioned earlier, like they're checking the scope, right, to make sure it hasn't infiltrated. Your face kind of lit up, so I'm sure there's things that are top of mind for you.
This is a great question. This one's near and dear to my heart. So what we've seen is that so if you were to think about it, if you were to put yourselves in the shoes of an IT person, so you know that your system has been compromised, and let's say it's a ransomware. And so you've got this massive pool of data that is no longer accessible, and you know that it's essential to keep the organization running. What's your gut reaction to do?
Hopefully I have a backup.
There you go. 100%.
Yeah.
Hopefully you got a backup, and then what do? You move to restore, right? Oh, cool. That's what we do backups for. Let me just restore it, right? The challenge is, and so I'm going to come back. So your question was, what should you not do? Don't rush to restore. So one of the biggest, so there's two different pieces to that. Number one is that you could potentially overwrite evidence that you would need in order to be able to identify this threat actor and be able to take the appropriate actions and things of that nature. But most likely what's happened is that either A, your backups have been compromised as well, or B, you've been backing up, like the threat actor has been persistent in your environment for a period of time, and you just have all their tools and all their indicators of compromise backed up. And so what are you going to do? You're just going to restore fresh data that has the exact same vulnerabilities in it, and they're just going to detonate again. But now they're going to know that you're actively in a recovery mode. And so you've actually tipped your hand a little bit. And so it makes negotiating with them a little bit harder because they know that you're actively working to recover, and you might actually have good backups that they weren't able to get to. So the number one thing you don't want to do is rush into recovery. That's where forensics really comes in. So, I haven't done a great job of kind of walking you through the individual steps here, but we talked about, executive communications. We talked about getting legal involved. We talked about managing communications across the organization. The next one really comes into how do you get an incident response team engaged, heavily focused around forensics. Because what you want to do is you want to partner with these experts to really go through and kind of with a fine-tooth comb, identify the various different activities, log data, files, and understand what is the kill chain. The kill chain is basically how did the threat actor actually penetrate your environment and land this malicious content inside of your environment. So understanding both how did they get in, but also what are the tools that they use to actually perpetrate the actual attack. Those are called the indicators of compromise. And the reason you want to do that is because A, you want to make sure that you effectively close the door so they can't get back in through the same means. And B, you want to be able to contain and remove those indicators of compromise, because both you want to get them out of persistence of living in the environment, but as you're going through and doing restores, you want to restore that into kind of like a clean room space where you can restore it, look for those indicators of compromise, cleanse the restore, and then promote it into production. And so all this comes back to your question. Don't ever rush too quickly into recovery. Make sure that you've really done your due diligence on understanding how did they get in, what is it that they used, what do those binaries look like, what are the changes that are made to the system, and then being able to appropriately contain and cleanse. So when you do the recovery, you can make sure that it's recovered in a good, healthy state that doesn't leave you vulnerable for future attack. So we've actually seen that happen before. So there's been a report of an organization that got hit by ransomware. Took them down for 2 weeks. They came back up. Big announcement. Hey, great news. We're back online. Within 24 hours, they were back offline because they got hit with the exact same ransomware by the exact same threat actor group. So they just didn't do the right level of due diligence on understanding what the kill chain was, what the indicators of compromise were, and removing persistence, like truly expelling the threat actor out of the environment before going to a full recovered state.
Great lesson
And
learned.
so when you think at ransomware, right? What's the first part of that? It's ransom. You're trying to get money. So if you think about like if they were trying to avoid having to pay that ransom, If you get hit a second time,
I mean, you're
in
really
a
at their
much
mercy.
harder negotiating
Right.
place.
Right. Anything else that IT should not do?
So I think another thing that IT should not do is you really, and it's really hard to say this, but you want to try and keep that the information that you've been compromised relatively contained, because
The fact that you've been compromised or the data that's been compromised?
the fact that you've been compromised.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't necessarily want that being completely spread. You want to make sure that you're really effectively managing the extent and the overall impact and how, especially the how. You really want to kind of keep that within a very, very tight group. And one of the biggest challenges is that we're starting to see that insider threat is a real thing. A lot of organizations are really kind of amping up the way that they're looking at insider threats. So people who have a business reason to be connected to their environment, but are, for all intents and purposes, a threat actor that's embedded in their organization. And so the more that we can kind of manage and obscure some of those communications to the broader overall populace of the organizations that we support is probably healthy until we get to a point where recovery is imminent. And even then, still trying to manage those communications is extremely important.
State the obvious. Why is that so important?
So the reason is because we still want to try and keep the threat actors out. We're trying to avoid reinfection. There's a number of different reasons as far as so we talked about ransomware. We talked about, and a big part of that is negotiation. So ransom negotiation. And the more people that understand, the more people that are going to potentially talk, especially with the presence of social media, things will tend to get out. That can get consumed by the threat actors, and it puts organizations in a tricky type of a situation when it comes to negotiating.
So you're already vulnerable. You
Yep.
don't want to make it worse
Correct.
by letting others know that you're vulnerable.
Yep.
Because even though we would want to trust all of our teammates,
Sometimes
that's
we
the
can't.
reality. Right.
Sometimes we can't.
Right.
Yep.
But you definitely let your legal team know, you let your PR team know, and you limit your internal communications until it's absolutely necessary. And
Yep.
you mentioned earlier the 8K form that has to be completed
Yep.
within 4 days, I believe it is, of an attack.
Yep.
And you have to know
It's tight.
the right time to
tight.
do that.
Yeah, and you need to understand, and that's really like a legal and executive really call as far as understanding what's the overall extent and impact of the incident that's occurred. Does this actually trigger and require the filing with the SEC? So it's again, it's very delicate. It's a very, very delicate balance where you want to do the right thing, but you also don't want to falsely alarm people or take I don't want to say take accountability, but you don't want to necessarily take blame for something that isn't entirely within the scope of what you would be communicating out.
Are there any final steps before we get to the after action of what happened?
So the big one is it really does come back to recovery. So I think that's one of the biggest things. I talked a little bit about this, but one of the things that's super important is making sure that you are properly cleansing your environment. So you're not just restoring good into bad. And so that's one of the big areas where we've seen organizations need a little bit more support. And so when I talk about recovery, it's not necessarily just purely a technical. It's also a people type of a conversation. So a lot of times, I'm just going to throw this out there, IT people are very... They take a lot of pride of ownership in the systems that they construct and they support. Sure. And so when something like this happens, they are the first people to throw themselves at the bus. And I have seen people work 60, 70 hours straight, no sleep, just continue to work. They feel like it is their personal obligation or responsibility to pull the company out of the fire, if you will. And so they don't take any consideration for their own personal care or their own personal health. So one of the big things that I really try and highlight to organizations and leaders that I meet with is, as you're building out that plan that we talked about, making sure that you understand what is your flexible staffing strategy? How are you going to be able to bring people in at the right time? Because this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. Most of these incident response recoveries take 10 days plus. We've seen some that take up to 90 days. And for a lot of those, you're running in a 24/7 operation where you got people around the clock that are actively working on recovery efforts. And so you can't do that with your existing staff. So number one is making sure that you have a really good, flexible staffing model built into your incident response plan. And that's not just necessarily knowing where you can go to get labor. It's also making sure that you have good documentation. So when you go out to bring that labor in, you can get them onboarded and familiar with your environment as quickly as you possibly can. That is so, so important. I literally can't stress that enough, is that recognizing who are those trusted partners in your ecosystem that you know bring good quality resources to bear, but providing them with the means so that they can get onboarded and effective as quickly as possible. We were supporting another client in this same type of an event. It took us 2 weeks. Like, we were able to amass an army of technical experts to be able to help them with their recovery efforts. But we couldn't get them busy because we had to go through and do a series of discovery in order to be able to get the familiarity that we needed in order to be able to properly augment the existing team and continue the recovery efforts forward faster.
It sounds like that documentation then should be part of your
100%.
onboarding with a security team.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think a lot of organizations today, they look at, the need for documentation. It's kind of like a running joke, if you will, within IT, is that we always let our documentation slide. And I am guilty. I look back on my operations days back a few years, and I was terrible at maintaining my documentation. But not only is it good for just general recovery and operational best practices, but when you think about it through the lens of incident response and rapid resource ramp up, like it's absolutely critical. Like it's almost like a life and death type of a situation.
So what I'm gathering from you is, yes, there are technical considerations and there are processes to all this. But the other piece that I'm hearing is really the people impact. Like you mentioned at the beginning, like having that plan so that when you do have to act on it, you're not figuring out on the fly, which causes just, insurmountable stress on top of what you're already feeling. Don't act on impulse, so don't restore data in the moment. And then having that plan for contingency resources so that you don't have teammates working on the clock, 24 hours for 8 hours. Like, no one makes good decisions off of no sleep.
No, bad things happen. Like, even somebody with the best of intentions. We're talking about the good guys who are helping to try and recover. You go, you hit like 40 hours of no sleep under probably some of the highest pressure moments of your entire career, your life. Like you literally probably feel like you're battling for your job. You feel like you're battling for the survivability of your company. Like, it doesn't get much higher stakes than that.
Yeah.
And so when you're operating with that emotional element coupled together with just high intensity technical work, mistakes happen. Mistakes happen a lot. And it's not out of malice. It's just out of just human nature and overexhaustion.
Yeah, we're not built that way.
No.
So let's assume that we've done everything right.
Okay.
We had our incident response plan.
Yep.
We called the right people in the right order. We let the right people know the information. We kept our communication channels separate between our executive branch and our technical branch with really good communication between the two. We've got everything under control, and we avoided ending up in the news.
Love it.
That's a win.
Best case scenario.
That's it, right? We just put it all in a drawer and move on?
No way. So I'm going to come back to, we talked about the incident response plan. And you never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Okay, says Jeremy Nelson.
That's right. Trademark. So the whole situation is that we talked about, you build a plan and you want to practice that plan. Well, there's no better way to practice a plan than in a real live incident, major event response. And so the worst thing that you could do is to just come out the other side of it and go back to business operations. Doing an effective after action review and lessons learned event is absolutely essential, because that is going to directly reflect and get incorporated into your incident response plan, as well as your maturity of your cybersecurity operations. Like, you should understand and learn, okay, how did this particular threat actor get in? What are the things that we need to incorporate into our cybersecurity best practices in order to make sure that this doesn't happen again, whether that be through technical tool implementation, whether that be through organizational change management and employee training, whatever that might look like. But making sure that you're going to have lessons learned. No matter how well you've practiced, what's Mike Tyson's, right? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And so you had a plan, you executed it. There is not a single plan that goes off just as you'd scripted it, just as you'd practiced it, just as you'd tabletopped it. When you go into a real world event, you are going to learn things about yourself. You're going to learn things about your organization. You're going to learn things about your technology. You're going to learn things about your partner ecosystem. And so the best thing that you can do is, after you come out the other side, set aside some time while it's still fresh. Get the key players back into a room and do that after action review. I would highly suggest bringing in almost like a neutral third party to run the after action review kind of through a normal scripted process. So that way they're not emotionally tied to any of the responses. They can help facilitate a very open and honest view of the way that things went down, and really capturing those and then incorporating those into your incident response plan and your future tabletop exercises.
No organization too big or too small for good after action review.
No, not at all. I mean, we do them all the time for normal operations, right? So when you think about like the day-to-day conducting of business, we always want to learn. The way that you get better is to learn from your mistakes of the past. And in this particular instance, and not even necessarily your mistakes, you should learn from your successes too. So you should, after action, review things that went well and say, hey, we should do more of that. Like, why aren't we doing more of this? It's the same thing with an incident response. You're going to do things that are really, really good, and you need to amplify those, but you're going to identify areas of opportunity and growth, and you want to make sure that you put corrective measures in for those.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said not just your mistakes, but also things that did well.
100%.
Yeah. Here's a little bit of a curveball. What happens when it's not your breach?
Ooh, so this is an interesting one. So you can mean a couple of different things. I'm gonna lean into this one because basically one of the things that we're seeing a lot of organizations focus on heavily these days is third-party risk management and supply chain. And so really understanding what are the downstream impacts to you as an organization if somebody in your ecosystem is impacted by a major incident. So yeah, I think that's really where third-party risk management programs really come in super effective, because not only does it help you understand the security profile of the organizations within your supply chain, but it helps you understand like what's the overall impact, like what's the role that they play within your business, and then understanding where do you have overlap. So typically what you want to establish is some type of notification so that you are included in the notification program within your third party partners incident response, is that when it goes to notifying partners, that you are part of that notification process. And then building into your own response, like what's the risk? What does that mean as far as risk to your business? What are your contingency plans? And what are potential controls that you need to put into place in order to be able to protect you from being the next victim in the chain from that particular third party, or from the major incident that's happened within that third party.
So that could potentially be, let's say there's a piece of software that most of your company uses. It's been impacted. It's got a security breach. You could tell your employees what to stop using that software for right now. You can shut it off from your network. Is that the kind of approach that you're looking at?
So, we'll just use an example that's fairly current, right? So there's a network monitoring software package that was infiltrated, where basically malicious code was embedded into the actual product itself that got pushed down to every organization that was consuming it through automatic updates, right? So I think that's kind of what you're hinting at. So in that particular circumstance, yeah, like that's that scenario where you need to, you do kind of go into incident response mode, because that third party had a way of directly landing executable binaries inside of your environment. So there's other ones where they're maybe a little bit more cursory. So we'll just say, like, say your logistics provider is hit by some type of ransomware, and so their operations go down. They can't actually direct vehicles. They can't actually load and deliver packages. Tracking systems are down, things of that nature. There's one particular response that you would have as far as like operational and business continuity associated with that third party impact. It doesn't necessarily represent a way for that threat actor to laterally move into your environment. Whereas with the one that we were just talking about, this is a lateral movement where you've actually allowed that third party to have the threat actor land executable and potentially expose your environment as well. So yeah, so coming back to your point, that would actually turn into a similar incident response where you would have to go through, you'd have to isolate that system, you need to pull it out of your environment, but then you also need to go start, and it's like a threat hunt. You're looking for the persistence and presence of threat actor activity in your environment that could have used that particular tool and that software supply chain as a launch point into your IT ecosystem.
Got it. Jeremy, I want to end with you with 5 insights. This is kind of our speed round, okay?
Oh boy.
Name one security red flag that leaders overlook or dismiss.
So the red flag that I think a lot of leaders overlook or dismiss, especially in the context of what we've been talking about today, I would come back to immutability of their backups. A lot of times for speed purposes, right? So they recognize is a lot of the backups and data protection systems that we use today are heavily focused around just what I would consider run-of-the-mill IT operations outages, right? Some type of a failure that happens within the IT estate that you support. And so data protection is there to restore that quickly and get you back up and running. It doesn't necessarily take into account threat actor activity. And so a lot of organizations are content with, hey, I've got backups, they run this long, but not putting those in a protected area where those are immutable so that the threat actor wouldn't be able to get access to those and make them unusable when it comes time to restore. Because that's typically what we see. The behavior that we see is that as soon as they get in, they start looking for where are the backups because they want to attack those first and then go after the real data, because as soon as real data gets impacted, their presence is now known. And so you immediately start falling back to your data protection. And so making sure that your data, your backup data is protected and immutable is extremely important. I don't see enough organizations incorporating that today.
So assuming your backups are safe, red flag.
Yep.
The most cost-effective action leaders can take today to increase their security posture is what?
Okay. So we talked about the plan. That's probably the most cost-effective because you're using existing resources who know your business, bringing them together, working on that plan and building out. And this is going to seem so silly and so rudimentary. Build a culture. Like start collecting cell phones, start collecting ways of connecting and communicating with key individuals out of band from your typical email and instant messaging platforms. So it's super cheap. It almost costs you nothing, but it is so highly and positively impactful when you're dealing with an incident response.
And then print it out and keep it everywhere.
Print it out and keep it someplace, where it's handy. It's almost like the football.
All right. I'd love to ask you this one because I know that you've fallen for this. What's the easiest type of email to test employee vigilance?
All right. So for me, it was obviously a DocuSign request at the end of the month. But I think one of the easiest ones to send out is just and we see this. It's actually proven is that you just send out like, hey, you actually send an email disguised as the platform that you use for communications, right, for identity services, and say there's been unexpected activity identified. Click on this link to check your activity and reset your password. Yeah. So you're already instilling a certain level of concern, fear, right, personal accountability and responsibility, and so there is a natural inclination to click on that and help secure your identity. But what you've actually done is the exact opposite. So that's the most effective one that I've seen.
That's a good one. What's one question that leaders should be asking their security teams but don't?
So I think one of the things, so I'll come back to, we talked about this, like what's our process and procedure for flexible staffing? If we become the victim of an event, like how are we going to recover? If we have to move to 24/7 operations for an extended period of time, how do we do that? Like, what does that look like? Do we have the appropriate documentation to onboard resources quickly?
I was going to say, do you have the documentation done?
That's
Is it updated?
That's right.
It feels like every product right now is AI infused, right? There's AI in everything. There's AI washing, but it does almost feel like AI in security is probably an area that you need to pay attention to. Like, is there, in your opinion, if a security product doesn't have some sort of AI component, is even worth putting in your stack?
It is, because I think the interesting thing that's happening within AI right now is that there's a lot of ways to actually plug AI in through other means. So even if the tech stack, even if the particular technology doesn't have AI built into it, it probably has a way of, like, whether it's through MCP integrations or some other way, to be able to incorporate AI into it. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily rule it out if it doesn't already have an AI capability, but I would be looking for ways to incorporate that into whatever your AI strategy is, because, and I say this all the time, security is a data problem. Like, in order for us to be successful at what we do, everything, like I was talking about with forensics, everything from like the perspective of a SOC analyst, it all comes back to just gathering data, analyzing data, looking for trends, looking for anomalous behaviors, and being able to amplify those as events that warrant further investigation and response. And so AI is awesome at solving data problems. And so, yeah, it's a space that is very uniquely ripe for integration and enhancement through the incorporation of AI. But just because a technology doesn't have AI built in doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a worthy component of your tech stack. And I would even go the opposite. Just because something has AI doesn't necessarily mean that it's an effective implementation of AI that's actually going to accelerate your ability to respond, increase overall security, or reduce operational complexity.
And finally, because not every organization has a chief information security officer, especially one as talented as yourself. So if an organization does not have that role, you talked earlier about the importance of separating communications between IT leads and exec leads, and how if you have them together, it can really cause more damage than good. So if you don't have a chief information security officer in place, who takes the lead during an incident response?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the organization. So I hate saying that. That's such a consulting answer, right? It depends. But I'll actually get a little bit more precise than that. So if it's a relatively small organization, usually like your lead IT person will kind of step up. If it's a slightly larger organization, usually like a director of infrastructure will kind of step into a role of this nature. Sometimes, depending on the organization, it might be somebody in legal that ends up really kind of taking the reins and coordinating the technical activities that are happening, just because of the way that they interact with both the cybersecurity insurer and potentially the incident response team. But usually what ends up happening is that most organizations are gravitating towards having cybersecurity insurance. Like, it's, if you go through and you talk to various different corporate insurance brokers or underwriters, it's the number one product that's out there right now. And so lots of companies are kind of grappling with that and getting onboarded with some type of cybersecurity policy. And so a lot of times your insurers will help connect you with somebody that will provide a level of incident response and incident commander activities. So usually what ends up happening is that ends up being played by the role of a third party in those organizations that don't actually have an active CISO or an active InfoSec team, is that you'll have somebody who helps kind of coordinate and is a known entity to the organization and brings that level of familiarity, but it usually ends up being somebody from a third party.
Thank you. Jeremy, I'm feeling a lot less nervous now.
Good. That's what I'm here for.
We're so glad that we were able to have you come back and explain both the breach and how to recover. Really great information for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And if I don't see you before then, happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween to you too. Thanks, Jillian.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Insight On. If today's conversation sparked an idea or raised a challenge you're facing, head to insight.com. You'll find the resources, case studies, and real-world solutions to help you lead with clarity. If you found this episode to be helpful, be sure to follow Insight On, leave a review, and share it with a colleague. It's how we grow the conversation and help more leaders make better tech decisions. Discover more at insight.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are of those of the host and the guests and do not necessarily reflect on the official policy or position of Insight or its affiliates. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional or legal advice.